So you want to dive into the brutal, grimdark, yet often hilarious world of Joe Abercrombie. First of all, good choice. Joe Abercrombie is a modern fantasy author that I feel like is the most consistent in terms of quality. He writes unforgettably flawed, realistic characters, brutal action scenes, and some of the most gut-punching plot twists that the genre has to offer. Chances are you've probably heard of his first Law books. They're very highly recommended, or you might have heard of his recent release, The Devils, which is set in a brand new world he's writing in. Regardless, there's no better time than now to talk about Joe Abercrombie, where to start, and what to expect. This guide is going to walk you through everything you need to know before reading, spoiler-free, of course. Everything from the recommended reading order to his first Law universe, the Standalones, the short stories, even his young adult Shattered Sea Trilogy, and of course, The Devils. What I would say makes Joe Abercrombie stand apart in the grimdark subgenre is that he creates these deeply flawed, morally gray characters, but he makes them utterly fascinating to read. They're not just... He doesn't write cynicism for the sake of cynicism. There's still light moments in the first Law Trilogy, and these characters... You might not agree with the choices and the actions they're doing, but you understand why they're doing them. Sometimes you'll find you're even rooting for them despite yourself. They might not be characters you would root for in any other story, but you're rooting for them here because Joe Abercrombie makes you understand the way their brain works. He makes you sympathize for monsters. But not every character he writes is a complete monster. Oftentimes he's writing bad people that are trying to do the right thing, that are trying to be better people. Sometimes they might not exactly succeed at that, but they're trying to do the right thing. He also has a knack for subverting fantasy tropes. There's no cookie cutter hero's journey in these stories. Instead, you're gonna find cynical soldiers and barbarians, self-serving manipulators, mercenaries chasing coin, and people just trying to survive in a brutal world. And while Abercrombie writes gritty, bloody stories, something he does best is infuse those with humor and also some really profound lines that are going to stick with you. Like honestly, the quote, "Once you have a task to do, better to do it than live in fear of it." This is something I remind myself of constantly. If for some reason you need a little more convincing, I'm gonna quickly give you 5 reasons why you should read Joe Abercrombie. Reason number 1, he is a character-first writer. His characters are flawed, funny, cruel, and heartbreakingly human. Reason number 2, Joe Abercrombie's dark humor. Just when things are at the bleakest, he's going to undercut it with some razor-sharp joke that is actually going to make you laugh out loud. Reason 3, subversion of tropes. Now, subverting fantasy tropes has kind of become like a trope in itself. So many authors try incredibly hard to subvert all their tropes, but Joe Abercrombie just does this in a really satisfying way. He writes messy people, self-serving people trying to do the right thing, often messing up. You have to be realistic about these things, and Joe Abercrombie keeps things realistic. Reason number 4, Joe Abercrombie writes legendary battle scenes. These are brutal, visceral, and very cinematic. He's one of the best writers when it comes to battle scenes. He's up there with John Gwynne and David Gemmell, in my opinion. And reason number 5 is consistency. Joe Abercrombie always delivers. He doesn't leave us waiting an extreme amount of time before finishing a trilogy. I'm not gonna point fingers at any other authors who have left us waiting, but I'm tempted. And overall, while Joe has improved over time, I feel like his works are very consistent in terms of quality. Moving on to the reading order, and we're gonna start off with the backbone of Joe Abercrombie's works, his first Law universe. This is where I would recommend starting. It's where most people recommend starting. Yes, you can start with The Devils. That's a fine place to start with as well, since it's completely different. It's set in a different world. world, but the First Law universe I feel like is Joe Abercrombie at his best, and because there's so many finished works in the First Law universe, you have a lot to read. Now you're going to want to start with his original First Law trilogy, and you're going to want to read it in publication order, obviously, starting with The Blade itself, then moving on to Before They Are Hanged, then The Last Argument of Kings. Now, this trilogy is set in a war-torn, politically unstable world that's loosely based off of late medieval Europe. I would say at the heart of this trilogy, it's about power, those who wield it, those who crave it, and those who are crushed beneath it. The Union, a wealthy but corrupt empire, is locked in wars on multiple fronts, a brutal northern conflict against fierce clansmen, and a simmering rebellion further south. Behind the throne, schemers and manipulators pull the strings, while whispers of ancient forces suggest that history might be repeating itself. Now, unlike epic fantasy, we're not following these noble heroes that are rising to save the day. Really, it's these flawed characters and their personal struggles and their bad decisions that drive the story, just as much as all the larger wars and whatnot going on in the background. And it's in this main trilogy that you're going to meet Joe Abercrombie's most famous characters, including Sandan Glokta, the crippled torturer, who's one of the most compelling points of view in all of fantasy. He's a once celebrated soldier, now a crippled torturer working for the Inquisition. Broken in body, razor sharp in mind, Glokta is one of fantasy's most unforgettable anti-heroes. His inner monologue, full of venom, wit, and self-loathing, is really just a highlight of this trilogy. I was surprised at how much I came to enjoy Sandan Glokta's inner musings. And just waiting for the next time he says bodies floating by the docks. We then have Logan Ninefingers, a scarred northern warrior with a bloody reputation and a haunted past. Known as the Bloody Nine, Logan is trying, futilely, to leave violence behind, but the world rarely lets him. And Logan's grim pragmatism is summed up by his catchphrase, "You have to be realistic about these things." There's also Giselle Dan Luthar, a vain, arrogant nobleman more concerned with fencing tournaments and status than anything meaningful. He begins the trilogy as one of the most detestable characters, yet Abercrombie has a knack for surprising you with where his arc lands. And of course, Bayaz, the mysterious first of the Magi, Abercrombie's Gandalf, if you will. He's the one who sweeps away several of the characters into their journey. And of course, there's others like Dogman, Shivers, Three Trees, Casca. We follow wildly different people and their stories are all colliding, and it's honestly one of my favorite trilogies out there. Now, I do have to say, Book 1, this I would say is kind of Joe Abercrombie's weakest. I still love Book 1 so much, but it does have a lack of plot, and this is something that a lot of people critique it for, and I think it's fair enough. Basically, Book 1 is introducing you to the characters I just mentioned, and it's kind of like a big character study, but we don't really get much plot in Book 1. Maybe some threads of that plot near the end, then the real plot kind of picks up in Books 2 and 3. If you're a character-driven reader, I don't think that's really going to be an issue. I think it works very well, but some people are more plot-driven, and they were expecting more in this book. So I do want to mention, it does get better after Book 1. Now, after reading this trilogy, you're going to want more, and thankfully Abercrombie didn't leave us waiting. He wrote 3 standalone novels set in the First Law universe, and you should not skip these standalones. In my opinion, the standalone novels are actually Joe Abercrombie at his best. I feel like these are some of his best stories that he's written. You can read these standalones by themselves as standalone novels. However, I do recommend reading the original trilogy beforehand, because you're going to pick up on connections and cameos, and you're you're also just going to see the wars and the politics and the evolution of this world. Now, collectively, these three standalones are often called the Great Leveler Trilogy because they kind of explore what happens when larger forces, whether revenge, war, or the march of civilization, grind people down to size. The first standalone you're going to want to read is Best Served Cold. This is like my personal favorite Joe Abercrombie book. I do need to do a reread pretty soon, but I remember this one being like my favorite. Highly recommend reading this standalone. This is Joe Abercrombie's revenge epic. It's set in this feuding Italian-inspired city-state. We follow Monza Mercado, a mercenary betrayed by her employer and left for dead. And we see her claw her way back to life with a single-minded mission: kill everyone on her hit list one by one. It's bloody, it's ruthless, and it's kind of like reading a fantasy Kill Bill or Gladiator. Basically a violent road trip with a mismatched crew of killers, poisoners, and psychopaths. And along the way, Abercrombie raises the question, does revenge actually heal, or does it just burn everything in its path? Now, there has been talks of a movie adaptation for Best Served Cold. Joe wrote up a movie script, and apparently Rebecca Ferguson was going to play Monza. Now, this project, I still see people talking about it and being hyped up about it. However, it seems like this is kind of dead in the water as of right now. Joe Abercrombie said it's not happening anytime soon, so we don't really know what's happening with the adaptation or if it's ever going to come to fruition, but hopefully one day. And what a bloody movie that will be. The next standalone you want to read is The Heroes. Now, if Best Served Cold is about revenge, this is about war stripped to its bones. The entire novel takes place over 3 days, and it's actually just one single battle that's happening, but it's told from several different perspectives. Joe passes the perspective baton mid-battle, mid-scene, so it creates this kind of sweeping cinematic view of all these dozens of characters battling. We follow generals, soldiers, cowards, heroes, and fools alike. It focuses in on heroism and glory and how these can often be exposed as lies. It's gritty. It's got Joe's classic dark humor. This is probably Joe Abercrombie's most experimental book to date, just because the way that it's written, how it's constantly changing perspectives. The next standalone is Red Country. Now, this is Joe Abercrombie's Western. This is kind of inspired by Lonesome Dove and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. It's a tale of revenge, redemption, and frontier expansion. And I gotta say, by the time I got to this one, I was really enjoying how Joe Abercrombie kind of shifts tones with each standalone, and I really like the way that he writes Westerns. This novel follows Shy South, a tough young woman whose farm is burned and her siblings are kidnapped. With her stepfather in tow, a character fans of the trilogy will immediately recognize, she rides into the untamed frontier to track them down. Abercrombie meditates on the cost of civilization, the push westward, the clashing of cultures, and the blood spilled in the name of progress. It's got duels, outlaws, mercenaries, and it has one of the most satisfying reveals in the whole First Law universe. So again, these are all standalone stories, but they have reoccurring characters. They all take place in the First Law universe, and you should definitely read them. Now, when you're done the standalones, you're gonna want to read the short stories. This is called Sharp Ends, and it's a collection of short stories taking place in the First Law universe. This stitches together moments in history, character vignettes. We have some new faces. We also get some origin stories of some beloved characters. So while this one isn't required, it connects some new entry points with some old connections. It has some very funny stories in here as well. I still highly recommend reading Sharp Ends if you want to wring every last drop out of the First Law universe. Now, after the standalones, after the short stories, Joe Abercrombie took a generational leap forward with the Age of Madness trilogy. This is set roughly 30 years after the original First Law trilogy and around 15 years after the events in Red Country. Book 1 is A Little Hatred, Book 2, The Trouble with Peace, and Book 3, The Wisdom of Crowds. I'll just set these up again. The world has changed. The age of kings and mercenary generals is fading, replaced by industrial progress, factories, railways, unions, and social upheaval. But with progress comes unrest, labor strikes, inequality, rebellion, and the kind of political corruption that Abercrombie loves to pick apart. On top of that, wars still rage on the borders, old grudges fester, and the ruling elite continue to play their deadly games of power, dragging the next generation into conflicts they never asked for. Here, Abercrombie takes his grimdark lens and he points it at the upheaval of modernization. In the Age of Madness, he shows us how revolution, industrial growth, political compromises, it all chews people up just as ruthlessly as any battlefield. I gotta say, while I love the original cast of First Law, and they're always gonna be my favorites, the new cast here is so fun to follow. Joe Abercrombie writes some of my favorite female characters in fantasy within this trilogy. There's Rika, a young woman from the north cursed with the long eye, a gift or burden of foresight, and her arc is one of survival, leadership, and the weight of destiny. She's a spiritual successor to Logan Ninefingers, I would say, but with her own sharp, wry voice. There's also Savine, but I don't want to spoil anything about her. I want to keep it a secret for when you start this series. But she thrives in the cutthroat world of finance and trade, and she is one of Abercrombie's best creations. She's ruthless, intelligent, and just really compelling. There's also Orso and Leo Dan Brock. There's some really fantastic characters in this secondary trilogy. I know a lot of people who have enjoyed the First Law trilogy, but they haven't given the Age of Madness a chance. And if you're one of those people, you need to rethink your decisions and read The Age of Madness. This shows Abercrombie at the heart of his powers. His character work is sharper, his plots are tighter, and instead of repeating the beats of his original trilogy, he's managed to evolve the world, pushing it into a new era where the Age of Swords collides with the Age of Machines. As the old world dies and a new one rises, Abercrombie shows that greed, ambition, and cruelty are constants. Only the method change. Now, as of right now, that is the entire First Law universe. I highly recommend diving into Abercrombie's First Law. It's one of my favorite series in fantasy. Now, when I say read, I actually would recommend listening to First Law. Well, really, I would recommend immersion reading. If you don't know what immersion reading is, it's when you are reading the physical book while listening to the audiobook. And in this case, the audiobooks for First Law are just so good. They're narrated by Stephen Pacey, and Stephen Pacey is one of my favorite narrators of all time. He gives every character a distinct voice, and Joe Abercrombie in general is very good at giving each character a different voice. You always know which character is on the page before even seeing their name because the distinct voice that Abercrombie gives them. But of course, Stephen Pacey just brings that to life. Stephen Pacey's narration of Glokta is a huge standout. He gives Glokta a lisp when he's speaking in dialogue, but then his internal monologue has no lisp at all, which obviously makes sense, but it's just a small detail that just makes it so good. And really, I just can't imagine any of these First Law characters without Stephen Pacey at this point. Also, immersion reading, I highly recommend it. It just makes you so much more immersed when you're reading it and listening to it at the same time. And if you do enjoy Stephen Pacey's narration, he also narrates The Devils, which is the next book I'm going to talk about in the reading order. Now, this you could read first if you prefer. It is not related to the First Law universe at all. This is a brand new world that Joe Abercrombie's writing in, and it's set in an alternative medieval Europe. The main cast is absurd in the best way possible. We have a narcissistic necromancer, we have a Swedish berserker werewolf, a geriatric vampire, an immortal cursed knight, an invisible elf, a pirate, a thief, and this little group of misfits are all conscripted by the church's secret Black Ops division, the Chapel of Holy Expediency, and they're led by Brother Diaz, a wide-eyed, cowardly monk who's in way over his head. And their mission is given by none other than the Pope, who happens to be an 11-year-old girl. The mission involves escorting Alex, a street urchin who's the long-lost imperial heir to the throne of Troy. They have to travel across a plague-ridden, elf-haunted, war-torn alternative Europe while dodging mutant abominations and political assassins. It is wonderful and it's addictive. Now, from what I gather, it sounds like this is planned to be 3 different standalones that's interconnected. Each volume is going to work separately but enrich the others, so it doesn't seem like it's a traditional trilogy. It's more so like the Great Leveler, the First Law standalones. If you enjoy Abercrombie's humor, this is Abercrombie's funniest book yet. It is the most over-the-top Abercrombie book, and I mean that in the best way. There is a lot of people that didn't really enjoy The Devils compared to his First Law books. I enjoy both of them, and I thought this has some of Joe Abercrombie's best moments yet. I did feel like we didn't quite get as much character growth as we do in his First Law books, but the characters that he created in this one are so compelling, so entertaining as well, and they're all unique from each other. And this is an incredibly hard book to put down. I mentioned it in my top 10 binge-worthy books video. This book is just so fun and very action-packed. Highly recommend checking out The Devils. And then finally, I need to talk about a series that I really don't see many people mentioning, but this is Joe Abercrombie's Shattered Sea Trilogy. And this is really quite different than all of his other books. This is a leaner, fast-paced, young adult series. It's kind of like if the First Law was made for young adults. Book 1 is half a king, book 2, half the world, and book 3, half a war. This is set in a Viking world of coastal kingdoms, ships, fjords, and these books follow a new cast of characters across 3 volumes, with each book introducing a different protagonist. The story begins with Prince Yarvi, the unlikely heir to a throne that he never wanted, born with a crippled hand in a warrior culture that prizes strength. Yarvi is underestimated and he's kind of dismissed by everyone, but when betrayal robs him of his family, he swears an oath to regain his rightful place, not through brute force, but through cunning, cleverness, and determination. Each of these books kind of expand in scope. We get some new protagonists in the second book, and then the third book has this giant war and we have multiple perspectives. These are more accessible and fast-moving. They have a clearer sense of momentum. They can still be violent and tense, but they don't have the grimness of his adult series. It's kind of like sanded down Joe Abercrombie. His signature style is here though. He's still writing complex, morally gray characters that are clever. There's some humor in this series. It's just all written for a younger audience. We also touch on more hope and camaraderie and growth, even if it doesn't shy away from the hard truths. I do think the Shattered Sea could be an interesting place to start with Joe Abercrombie. I just don't think it's his best work. I think it's a fantastic series, but I think his other adult fantasy books are much stronger. If you do happen to find Joe Abercrombie's books too grim, too violent for you, then I would recommend checking out The Shattered Sea, and hopefully you'll enjoy those ones. And there we have my ultimate reading guide to Joe Abercrombie. Let me know in the comments what your favorite Joe Abercrombie book is, if you've read him, and if you haven't read him, let me know what you plan on starting with. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. As always, a huge thank you to all of my patrons who make these videos possible. I want to give a special shout out to my most recent patrons, Magdalena Williams and Polly. Thank you so much for supporting the channel.